how do you get through what's about to happen? Because it's one thing to crash, but can you survive it? The problem with most people is they're stuck in microeconomy. You know, they don't see the big picture. And I would estimate 90% of Americans just believe that don't worry, America will bounce back. Everything will be happy days are here again. And as a U.S. Marine, we call the people who are stuck in the microeconomy, they got their heads up their asses. They can't even see what's happening in the real world. And when you look at the macro, the whole world is collapsing around them. Richard Duncan, you've been calling this for a long time. The dollar is in crisis, isn't it?
Well, so our economic system is in crisis. And I'm really worried now that we're on the verge of a serious economic crisis that could see the destruction of trillions of dollars of additional wealth before this thing is over. Capitalism, in my view, became corrupted at the fundamental level when we stopped backing dollars with gold.
Yes.
And to make a long story, not too complicated a story, but to make a long story short, this unleashed an explosion of credit. Credit absolutely exploded. Total credit or total debt in the United States grew from $1 trillion when I was 3 years old in 1964 to $91 trillion now, from $1 to $91 trillion in my lifetime. And during that process, that created a great deal of wealth, a great deal of economic growth in the United States and all around the world. But our economy became addicted to credit growth. Our economy must have credit growth to stay out of crisis. And now credit is contracting when you adjust it for inflation. So this is a very serious problem for our economic system, which I call creditism rather than capitalism, since it's driven by credit growth.
Micro is this: you're pumping gas into your leased SUV, and you're going, why is the price of oil going up? That's micro. I mean, they can't see it, but inflation, I'm afraid, is systemic now. And a lot of it is because what Richard's talking about is creditism. They just print so much money. Instead of solving the problems, they print money. And now it's going to backfire on everybody. One is the Nord Stream 2, they torpedoed the pipeline. You have the war in the Ukraine. The English pound crashed. Japan's yen is in serious trouble, and I guess North Korea fired some rocket at the Japanese. You have inflation being systemic, and you have the BRICS, BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. I mean, nothing macro here.
UK government was going to have to borrow a great deal of additional money just at the time when the Bank of England, which had been buying government bonds through its quantitative easing program, it was planning to start selling government bonds. So suddenly, England looked like a third world country. Its interest rates on its government bonds doubled in about a 2-week period. They went from 2% on a 10-year government bond yield to 4%. And normally that would make the currency appreciate. But the English pound started dropping like a rock. It fell from 1.15 to the dollar on Monday last week. By Friday morning, it was 1.12. By Friday afternoon, it was 1.09. And on Monday morning, it dropped to 1.03, the lowest in history. And so this huge swings in the currency, and more importantly, in the interest rates on the government bonds, was so violent and so unprecedented that the UK pension funds thought that they had cleverly hedged their positions with these derivatives contracts known as liability-driven investments. But the moves were so large that the people they had these derivative positions, hedging positions with, started calling in their margins, and they couldn't put up their margins. So they got sold out of these hedging positions, and it looked like the entire UK pension system, the various pension funds, were on the brink of going bankrupt.
What does it mean to the English people? Because their pensions were about to collapse, because and the Bank of England is the Fed, the same as our Fed, and so what does that mean? So when they start printing more money, What does that mean? Inflation, or they're trying to avoid a depression? What were they doing? That's been the problem since about 1998 when LTCM, long-term capital management, crashed, and the Fed had to bail out a hedge fund. And Jim Rickards is a friend of ours. He wrote the book Currency Wars and all that. His question was back then, who bails out the Fed? And I think we're kind of there now. I mean, that's what you've been writing about in Dollar Crisis and the Corruption of Capitalism. Who's going to bail out the Bank of England? And who's going to bail out the Fed and all the Bank of Japan and all these central banks?
Well, the central banks have had it very easy for the last 3.5 decades because globalization was extremely deflationary. It was pushing down prices and the inflation rate was very low, so interest rates were very low. So they could get away with printing a whole lot of money without causing high rates of inflation. Right. And by printing a lot of money, they would buy government bonds, and that would finance government spending and let the government spend a lot of money and stimulate the economy that way. So this was a Goldilocks for 3.5 decades. But suddenly now globalization is going at least partially into reverse. Yep. First, we had COVID and the supply chain bottlenecks all around the world. Next thing you know, Russia's invaded Ukraine, pushing up energy prices, oil prices, gas prices, wheat prices, corn prices, another big round of inflation. And suddenly the central banks are in shock because for the first time in 35 years, they have to deal with inflation. And inflation in the UK is at 10%. It's 10% in Germany. It's practically 10% in the United States. And so now if they try to support the economy by printing more money, that's going to just fan the inflationary flames. But if they don't print more money, then credit's going to contract and the economy is going to spiral into crisis. The Bank of Japan, the Japanese central bank, is determined to keep their interest rates at a very low level, even though interest rates in the United States and everywhere else, most other countries are going up very rapidly. And so if the US interest rates are 3.5%, Japanese interest rates are only 0.25%, and the Bank of Japan plans to keep them there. And they can do that, but that means no one's going to want to hold yen because you can't earn any money on if the interest rate's 25 basis points. They want to sell their yen and buy dollars, and because the dollar you can get 3.5% interest. So that means the Japanese yen is falling. It's at a 20-year low. And unless the Bank of Japan changes its policy, it looks like it's going to keep falling.
We're crashing, like it or not. You know, I'm a Marine pilot. I went down 3 times. And the question is not if you're going to crash. The question is, will you survive the crash? And that's what I love about the Marine Corps. We practice crashing every single day. And so when the 3 times it happened in Vietnam, we survived. Question is not the question, are we going to crash? We are crashing. But what's the significance, like Biden cutting off the Keystone XL pipeline in America, which is an act of terrorism and treason, in my opinion, and then the Nord Stream 2 pipeline gets demolished intentionally. And it's Russia's major source of income is exporting power or energy.
But if I had to guess, I believe that Russia blew them up. It was not just Nord Stream 2, which hasn't begun operating yet. It was also Nord Stream 1. Both of them got blown up at the same day, nearly the same time. So Nord Stream 2 hadn't started pumping any gas yet, but Nord Stream 1 had been pumping gas for a very long time until recently. Putin stopped all the gas going through Nord Stream 1. So there was no gas going to Europe from Russia through Nord Stream 1 or Nord Stream 2. And the day that they blew up was the day or the day before that a new pipeline opened between Norway and Germany that's going to supply a great deal of gas from Norway to Europe this winter. And I believe that by blowing up these pipelines, which were doing Russia no good anyway, because they weren't pumping any gas anymore, and so their economy will have a very severe crisis. So that seems to be the message he was sending. Of course, he's also threatening to use nuclear weapons, which is the most frightening statements I've seen coming out of any world leader since I was a child.
You know, and the dollar crisis was after Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard in 1971, which was the corruption of capitalism, because you could print money to pay bills, the U.S. dollar. What you said was that the reason there wasn't inflation was because China was producing so much. They could send goods over to America, like even our pharmaceuticals, at such low prices that Americans didn't feel the inflation. Once again, it's the high productivity of the Chinese people. The reason that's important is because, you know, I said in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, your house is not an asset. That was 25 years ago this year. And for many of the middle class, or the boomers of my generation, their house is their biggest asset they have. And I said, it's not. And today they're crashing. And their housing price, their 401k is probably crashing. Wall Street for years has been selling 60-40. 60% equity, 40% bonds. And they're all dropping. You know, it's all dropping right now. All dropping right now.